If you've ever stood in your own kitchen and felt like a stranger in your own life, you know exactly what I mean when I say I knew something was wrong the second I walked through my front door that Thursday evening. The lights were on, all of them. The good lamp in the living room, the one I only turn on for company, was glowing soft yellow against the wall. My grandmother's quilt was bunched up on the armchair like someone had been sitting under it and tossed it aside. And there were 2 suitcases, big ones, hard shell, the kind people buy for international flights, parked right beside my couch like they'd been waiting for me. My mother came around the corner from the kitchen, holding one of my coffee mugs. My father was behind her, sleeves rolled up like he'd just finished some chore in my house. My house. The house I bought with my own money, on my own credit, with my own name on the deed. "There she is," my mother said, smiling like we were at a holiday party. "We were starting to wonder when you'd get home." I just stood there in the entryway with my work bag still on my shoulder. My name is Hollis Pemberton. I'm 31 years old, and I'd come home from a 10-hour day at the accounting firm where I'd just been promoted to senior associate. I hadn't told my parents I was getting home late. I hadn't told my parents anything, actually, because we hadn't spoken in almost 5 months. Not since the last fight about my younger sister. "How did you get in?" I asked. My father waved his hand like the question was beneath him. "Your sister had a key from when you moved in. You really should be more careful, Hollis. Anyone could walk in here." The way he said it made my stomach turn over. Anyone could walk in here. Like a warning. Like a promise. My mother set the mug down on my coffee table without a coaster and sat down on my couch, smoothing her skirt. "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk to you about something important." I didn't sit. I stayed standing right there in the doorway with my keys in my hand, my pulse doing that thing it does, when something feels off but you can't quite name it yet. I looked at the suitcases again. I looked at the way my father wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I looked at how comfortable my mother was on my couch, like she'd been there for hours. "What's going on?" I said. "Why are you here? Whose suitcases are those?" "Hollis, please." My mother patted the cushion beside her. "Don't be difficult." That word. Difficult. The word she'd been using on me since I was 9 years old. The word that meant I was asking the wrong questions, having the wrong feelings, being the wrong kind of daughter. I'd spent 20 years trying to be less difficult, and somewhere along the way I'd realized that what they actually meant was less inconvenient, less in the way of what they wanted to do with their lives, which had always been about my little sister, Tabitha. Tabitha is 28. She's beautiful in the way that opens doors and makes strangers volunteer favors. She has never held a job for longer than 14 months. She has been engaged twice and called it off both times. She has lived in apartments my parents paid the deposits on, driven cars my parents made the down payments on, and gone on vacations my parents financed because she needed a reset. I love my sister. I do. But I learned a long time ago that loving her and getting anything from our parents were 2 different roads that did not cross. I sat down. Not because I wanted to, but because my legs were starting to feel strange and I needed to be steady when whatever was coming hit me. "All right," I said. "Talk." My father cleared his throat in that way he does. Before delivering news, he expects pushback on. He sat down in the armchair, my armchair, and put his elbows on his knees. "Hollis, we've made some decisions about the family's finances, and we wanted to come to you in person to discuss them. We feel that's the respectful thing to do." "Decisions," I repeated. "Yes." My mother jumped in. "Your father and I have been thinking a lot about Tabitha and the kids and what their future looks like. You know how hard things have been for her since the divorce." Tabitha had been divorced for 14 months. The divorce had been entirely her doing because she'd decided her husband, a perfectly nice man named Greg who worked in pharmaceutical sales, was too boring. She had 2 kids with Greg, ages 4 and 6, both of whom I loved fiercely, and who I saw maybe once every 2 months because my sister had a habit of cancelling plans at the last minute. "What about Tabitha?" I said flatly. My father took the hand off. "We sold the house." For a second I genuinely didn't understand what he meant. The house, our house, the house I'd grown up in, the split level on Van Dyke Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey, where my mother had hosted 40 Easter dinners, and my father had grilled in the same spot on the patio every summer of my life. You sold the Van Dyke house? It closed 3 weeks ago, my mother said brightly, like she was telling me about a new restaurant. We got $940,000 for it. Cash buyer. It was a wonderful deal. I sat there with my mouth slightly open. $940,000. My parents had bought that house in 1989 for something like $120,000. They talked about it as their nest egg my entire life. The plan they had repeated at every Thanksgiving, was that they would sell it eventually, downsize to a condo, and live off the difference for the rest of their lives. Okay, I said slowly. So where's the money? The silence that came after that question is one I will remember for the rest of my life. It was about 3 seconds long. It was the silence of two people who already knew what they had done and were about to find out how I was going to take it. We bought Tabitha a house, my father said. I felt my hands go cold. You bought Tabitha a house. In Princeton, my mother said. A beautiful colonial. 5 bedrooms, the schools are top-rated, there's a finished basement for the kids to play in. It came in at $860,000, which gave us a little cushion. She closed last Friday. She's so happy, Hollis, she cried. You bought Tabitha a house in Princeton for $860,000. Yes, with the money from your house. Yes, with the money you were going to retire on. My father shifted in the armchair. Well, that's the other thing we wanted to discuss with you. I want you to understand something. I am an accountant. Numbers are my job. I had already done the math in my head. 940,000 minus 860,000 is 80,000. $80,000 is not retirement money. $80,000 is, at best, 18 months of rent in a halfway decent senior community. My parents were 63 and 65. They had Social Security and a small pension from my father's union, but they did not have $80,000 worth of retirement plan. They had a problem, and they had brought their suitcases to my house. No, I said. My mother frowned. No what? We haven't asked you anything yet. You're not moving in here. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. My father's face hardened. My mother set down the coffee mug she'd been holding and folded her hands in her lap like a Sunday school teacher. Hollis, she said carefully, let's not get ahead of ourselves. You showed up at my house with suitcases. You let yourselves in with a key you took from my sister without my permission. You just told me you spent every dollar of your retirement on a house for Tabitha. What other conversation could we possibly be having right now? It would only be temporary, my father said. No. Hollis. No. My mother's voice got tight the way it does right before she switches modes. Hollis Pemberton, you have a 4-bedroom house and you live in it alone. Alone. You don't have a husband. You don't have children. You barely use this house. Do you know what your father and I gave up to raise you and your sister? Do you have any idea what we sacrificed? And now, in our golden years, when we need a little help from our own family, our own daughter, you can't even, Mom, you can't even let us stay in the spare bedrooms for a few months while we figure things out? Is that the kind of person you've become? Is that what your degree did to you? Made you cold? There it was. The script. The same script she'd been running on me since I was a teenager. The one where any boundary I set was evidence of moral failure. I'd done years of therapy on this script. I knew it line by line. And usually, in the moment, knowing didn't help. Usually I caved. But the suitcases, something about those suitcases parked next to my couch. Like the conversation was already over. Like my consent was a formality they could skip. Did something to me? I'd had a long day. I'd had a long 31 years. I felt something inside me that had been bent for a very long time, finally just snap. I'd like both of you to leave, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Excuse me, my father said. I'd like you to take your suitcases and leave my house. Tonight, right now. My mother actually laughed. It was a short, startled, ugly laugh. Hollis, don't be ridiculous. It's almost 8 o'clock. Where are we supposed to go? Tabitha has a 5-bedroom house in Princeton. I'm sure she has room. Their faces went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, then anger, then something else, something that looked a lot like fear. And that was when I understood. That was the moment the whole picture clicked into place for me, and I want you to understand it, because everything that happened next depended on me seeing it clearly. They had already asked Tabitha. They had already gone to the Princeton house with their suitcases, and my sister had said no. I was the backup plan. I had always been the backup plan. You already tried her, I said quietly. Didn't you? My mother's jaw clenched. You gave her $60,000 of your retirement money, and she wouldn't even let you sleep on her couch. Tabitha has the children to think about, my father said stiffly. She has a schedule. It's complicated. It's complicated. It's complicated. But moving in with me, with no notice, with no conversation, that's simple. Because I'm the one who never says no. I stood up. My hands were shaking a little, but I kept my voice steady, the way I'd practiced for years in client meetings. Calm voice, clear words, no apologies. Take the suitcases. Leave my key on the counter. I want both of you out of my house in the next 15 minutes. My father stood up too. He was a tall man, and he'd used his height to intimidate me. My entire childhood, leaning over me when I'd done something wrong, making me feel small. He did it now, took 2 steps toward me, and I watched him do it like I was watching a movie about somebody else's life. You ungrateful little Henry. My mother's voice cut him off. She'd stood up too. She walked over to me with her hands open, palms up, that placating expression she uses when she's about to ask for something big. Hollis, sweetheart, listen. I know this is a lot to take in. You've had a long day. Why don't we order some takeout? We'll sit down. We'll talk this through like adults. Get out of my house. She reached for my arm. I stepped back, and that was when she slapped me. I want to be careful here, because I've thought about this moment a lot. My mother had never hit me before. Not when I was a kid, not when I was a teenager, not in any of our worst fights. She'd done a lot of other things. She'd yelled, she'd ignored me for weeks at a time, she'd cried strategically in front of relatives, but she'd never put her hands on me. So when her palm connected with the side of my face, I didn't even react at first. I just stood there with my cheek burning and my ear ringing, trying to understand what had just happened. She looked as shocked as I felt. Her hand was still in the air. My father was frozen behind her. The doorbell rang. For a second, none of us moved. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, and then I heard my neighbour's voice through the door. Hollis! Hey, it's Marguerite! Everything okay in there? I thought I heard. I walked past my mother, past my father, past the suitcases, and I opened the front door. Marguerite Donnelly is 68 years old, a retired pediatric nurse, and she lives in the brick house to my right. She's been my neighbour for the 4 years I've owned this house. She had a casserole dish in her hands that she'd apparently been bringing over when she heard us. She took one look at my face, at the red mark that I could feel rising on my cheek, and her expression changed. Hollis, honey, are you okay? I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Behind me, I heard my mother start to say something, probably some explanation, some softening, and Marguerite looked past me into the living room and saw both my parents standing there. She'd met them a few times. She knew exactly who they were. Mrs. Retters. Pemberton, she said, in a voice I had never heard from her before. Did you just hit your daughter? This is a family matter, my father said. I asked Mrs. Pemberton a question, Marguerite said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She set the casserole dish down on my entry table, took her phone out of her cardigan pocket, and held it up. Hollis, do you want me to call the police? That was the moment. That was the moment I want you to remember, because that was the moment something turned over inside me for good. For my entire life I had been the daughter who absorbed, the daughter who smoothed things over, the daughter who tells herself it wasn't that bad, who minimized, who explained her family to herself and to other people. And here was this woman I barely knew, who had bought me a casserole because she was a kind person, standing in my doorway with her phone out, ready to call 911 because she'd seen what happened and she was not going to pretend she hadn't. Yes, I said. Please call them. My mother gasped like I'd shot her. My father's face went purple. Marguerite, bless her, started dialing without a single word. Hollis, don't you dare, my mother whispered. Get your suitcases, I said. Get out of my house. The police can talk to all of us when they get here. They didn't wait. My father grabbed both suitcases, my mother grabbed her purse, and they were out the door inside of 2 minutes. I watched them load the suitcases into my father's Buick from my front window, while Marguerite stayed on the line with the dispatcher. The officer who eventually came was a young woman named Officer Hayworth. She took my statement. She took Marguerite's statement. She took Marguerite's statement. She photographed my face. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I almost said no. I want to tell you that because I want you to know how hard it was. Even with the mark on my face, even with my mother's words still ringing in my ears, even with a witness standing right there, my first instinct was to protect them, to say it had been a misunderstanding, to find a way to make it smaller. I looked at Marguerite. She didn't say anything. She just looked back at me with this kind, steady expression, like she'd seen this exact moment 100 times in her career, and she was going to wait as long as it took for me to find the right answer. Yes, I said. I want to press charges. Officer Hayworth nodded like that was the right answer. She gave me a card. She told me about the next steps. She told me I might want to consider a restraining order and gave me information about how to file one. After she left, Marguerite stayed for another hour. She heated up the casserole, which turned out to be chicken and rice, and she sat at my kitchen table with me while I ate it because I hadn't realized until then that I was starving. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. At one point, she reached over and put a hand on my hand, and I started crying, and she just let me cry without trying to fix it. Before she left, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Honey, you are not the family villain just because you finally locked the door." I had the locks changed the next morning. Not just rekeyed. Replaced. New deadbolts. A smart lock on the front door. A ring camera at the entrance and another at the back door. I spent $1,100 on it, and I didn't blink. I texted my sister a short message, telling her the key she'd given my parents was no longer valid, and that I'd be filing for a restraining order against both of them. She didn't respond for 3 days, and when she did, it was a paragraph telling me I was tearing the family apart and the mom was inconsolable. I didn't write back. The restraining order went through. The assault charge went through. My mother pleaded down to a simple assault misdemeanor with anger management and probation, and she did not, as my sister claimed she would, die of shame. She did, however, lose her standing at her church, where she'd been on 3 committees, because the case made the local news in a small way and people in small communities talk. But here's the part I really want to tell you. 3 months later, almost to the day, I got a phone call from a man named Roland Pesci. Roland is, or was, my father's oldest friend. He'd been the best man at my parents' wedding. He'd known me since I was in diapers. When I saw his name on my phone, I almost didn't pick up. "Hollis," he said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're not talking to your folks, but I think you need to know what's going on." What was going on was this. My sister Tabitha, the proud new owner of an $860,000 colonial in Princeton, had not actually been managing things in Princeton. She had taken out a home equity line of credit against the house almost immediately, somewhere in the range of $200,000. She had used that money to invest in what Roland gently described as her boyfriend's business opportunity. The boyfriend was somebody she'd been seeing for about 6 weeks. The business opportunity was a chain of vape and CBD shops that her boyfriend had been trying to franchise for 2 years without success. The business had failed. The boyfriend had left. The $200,000 was gone, and the bank had started foreclosure proceedings on the Princeton house because Tabitha hadn't been making payments on the line of credit. My parents, who had been staying in a long-term stay motel off Route 22 in Springfield because Tabitha would not let them move into the Princeton house, were now facing the reality that the Princeton house was about to be taken back by the bank and that the $80,000 of cushion they'd had was almost gone after 3 months of motel rent, restaurants, and helping my sister with her legal fees. "They're going to need help, Hollis," Roland said. I'm not asking you to forgive everything. I just thought you should know." I thanked him. I told him I appreciated the call. I sat in my kitchen for about 45 minutes after we hung up, looking at the cabinets I had picked out myself, in the house I paid for myself, and I thought about a lot of things. I thought about being 9 years old and asking my mother why Tabitha got a bigger slice of birthday cake than I did, and being told I was difficult. I thought about being 17 and applying to college, and my father telling me that they would not be helping with tuition because they needed to save the college money for Tabitha, who was struggling academically and would really need it. I had paid for college with loans, scholarships, and 3 jobs. I thought about being 25 and buying this house, the down payment scraped together over 4 years, and how my mother had not come to see it for 9 months because she didn't drive that far anymore, even though my sister's apartment, which my parents had furnished, was 12 miles farther away than my house. I thought about every single time I'd been the bigger person, the responsible one, the one who didn't make trouble. And I made a decision. I did not call my parents. I did not offer them money. I did not invite them to stay in any of my 4 bedrooms. I did, however, send Roland the contact information for a social worker friend of mine who specializes in senior services and who I knew would help my parents apply for the housing assistance and SNAP benefits they were now eligible for. I gave Roland her direct line. I told him to tell my parents that I passed on a resource and that I hoped they would use it and that I wished them well. I did not say I loved them. I didn't, in that moment, know if I did any more. My sister called me 8 times in the span of 1 week after the foreclosure was formalized. I did not answer. She left voicemails that escalated from pleading to furious to threatening. In one of them she screamed that I had always wanted to see her fall. In another she sobbed that the kids were going to lose their bedrooms. I forwarded the threatening voicemail to my lawyer, in case I needed to update the restraining order. The kids, as it turned out, went to live with their father, Greg, who got emergency custody on the grounds that their living situation had become unstable. I called Greg about a month later and asked if I could see the kids. He said yes. He said he was sorry about everything. He said he'd always thought I was the same one. I see the kids twice a month now. We make pancakes, we watch movies, they call me Aunt Holly. It's been almost a year since the night with the suitcases. My mother's misdemeanor is on her record. My father has not spoken to me, though Roland tells me he is softening. My sister filed for personal bankruptcy in March. My parents are living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a 55-plus community in Hillsborough that my social worker friend helped them find, and they receive housing assistance, and they are, by all accounts, alive and not in crisis. I have not seen any of them since the night Officer Hayworth came to my house. People ask me sometimes, when this story comes up, if I feel guilty. The honest answer is that I felt guilty for about 6 months, and then, gradually, I stopped. What replaced it was something quieter and harder to name. Not happiness exactly, not closure. Something more like the feeling of putting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what my imposture was supposed to look like. A few weeks ago, I ran into Marguerite at the hardware store. She was buying potting soil. She hugged me and asked how I was, and I told her the truth, which is that I was doing fine. Better than fine. I told her I'd been promoted again at work. I told her I'd started dating someone, a man named Owen who teaches high school history and who has never once, in 8 months, asked me to be smaller than I am. I told her I was thinking about getting a dog. She squeezed my arm and she said, "Honey, I'm so glad." I drove home with the windows down and the radio on, and when I pulled into my driveway, the Ring camera caught me smiling. If you'd asked me a year ago whether I could survive losing my whole family in a single night, I would have told you no. I would have told you that family is family, that blood is blood, that you owe the people who raised you something you can't even put into words. I would have made every excuse my mother trained me to make. But I learned something in that doorway, with Marguerite standing beside me with her phone out. I learned that the people who actually love you don't come at you with suitcases and a slap. They come at you with a casserole and a question. They ask if you're okay. They wait while you find the answer. I'm 31 years old. I have a house with my name on the deed. I have a job I'm good at. I have a man who loves me, 2 nieces who call me Aunt Holly, and a neighbor who has become more of a mother to me in 12 months than my own mother managed in 3 decades. And I have a front door I can lock. I chose me. I'd choose me again tomorrow. And if you're sitting somewhere right now wondering whether you're allowed to choose yourself, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are. You always were. The only person who ever told you otherwise was the person who needed you small. Lock the door. I used to think that being a good daughter meant being a soft place for other people to land, no matter how hard they fell or how often. I learned, standing in my own doorway with my cheek stinging and my neighbor Marguerite holding her phone, that softness without limits is not love. It's a habit, and habits can be unlearned. Every single thing that happened to my parents after that night was something they built with their own hands. They chose to sell the only retirement they had. They chose to hand it to Tabitha, who they had taught, year after year, that consequences were something other people experienced. They chose to walk into my house with suitcases and assume my answer. None of that came out of nowhere. It came out of 3 decades of small decisions, each one whispering to my sister that she was exempt, and whispering to me that I was responsible. When the bill finally came due, the math was very simple. The person they had spoiled would not save them. The person they had used could not be used anymore. I think a lot about what it actually means to grow up. For a long time I thought it meant earning things. The degree, the promotion, the house with my name on the deed, but the real growing up, the kind that changes you, happened in the seconds between when my mother raised her hand and when Marguerite asked if I wanted her to call the police. In those seconds I had to decide whether I was going to keep telling myself a story that was killing me, or whether I was finally going to look at my family the way a stranger would look at them and tell the truth out loud. Character, I have come to believe, is not what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when the person hurting you is somebody you've been taught to protect. Wisdom is the part where you finally see the pattern. And the courage, the nerve, the spine is the part where you do something about it, even though every instinct you have is screaming at you to smooth it over and make it small. I won't pretend I don't think about my parents. I do. Some nights I picture my mother in that 1-bedroom apartment in Hillsborough, and I feel something pull in my chest, but I don't act on it. Feeling something and owing something are not the same. I gave them a resource. I gave them a way forward. What I will not give them is the part of me they spent 31 years trying to take. If anything I've said tonight sounds familiar to you, I want you to know that you are allowed to want a quieter life. You are allowed to be the one who finally puts the weight down. The people who really love you will not punish you for choosing yourself. They will bring you a casserole, and they will wait at your door until you are ready to open it.